Hi, welcome to this weekly ZP FoodSense webinar. So we'd like to do this weekly webinar really answering technical questions that have come in during the week. So let me jump straight into it. Actually, I do have a FoodSense Generation 4 in front of me, and I will do a quick demonstration of that shortly. The FoodSense Generation 4, if you don't know, is for testing the things like hotness of chili products by measuring the Scoville heat units of it. With that said, let me go forward a little bit quicker and say at ZP, if you're a FoodSense Generation 4 customer, you can expect personal online training. So for example, the question that I'm dealing with this week, these people have definitely received personal online training. You can expect weekly webinars. For example, this weekly webinar. You can also expect monthly webinars. So the question this week is actually, I say here HPLC versus Generation 4 data. So HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography, versus the data that comes off the Generation 4 FoodSense. Last week we actually did a video on it. This week the people who we did the video for, or webinar for, wanted to know about the individual test results, because on the FoodSense Generation 4, because it's so quick, easy to use and low cost, you can end up actually doing multiple tests. This is not something you can do with HPLC. So with HPLC, people take the results of the HPLC as absolute truth, when really if they were to rerun that sample again, or they were to prepare a new sample and test it again, they get a different result. But because of the expense and complexity of high performance liquid chromatography when determining capsaicin, people don't do this. Anyway, there was a video last week, and this is really, or a webinar, this is an extension of that. As I say, that if you're a FoodSense Generation 4 user, then you get personal online training. We do weekly webinars. They can be very technical. You will find this week's webinar technical. And then we do monthly webinars where there's a bit more of a sort of demonstration of the technology, even though I'll do a quick demonstration today. So the next one is on the 29th of August 2024. Sign up, come along. We do one in the morning, one in the afternoon. The one in the morning covers Asia really quite well, and Australia. And the one in the afternoon covers the USA, etc. We happen to be based in London, so if you come into the morning or afternoon, it works for you in Europe quite well. As I say, we've been analysing some results by HPLC. Not analysing, so these results have come in to us from a third party who's doing HPLC. It's actually the Korean Agricultural Technology Promotion Agency. So I haven't looked this up, but I presume these guys are kind of an official body. They actually gave the results in milligrams per 100 grams of capsaicin and dihydrocapsaicin. So it was ZP that had to kind of calculate the Scoville heat unit of those results. We can do those kind of calculations, but we did have to kind of do those calculations. So with the HPLC, we got these results in, and I just want to kind of comment when I say comment. So sample 1, 3400, sample 2, 4600, sample 3, 2100, sample 4, 5300. So we calculated the Scoville heat unit for these 4 samples from the data that was given to us from the Korean Agricultural Technology Promotion Agency. HPLC, I just want to comment on it. This is not necessarily... The thing about HPLC is most people don't really understand what's going on, and people don't understand the workflow in order to actually get that result. So you kind of get a sample, some sample is taken, it's sent to the third party. They would do then a sample preparation on it. There may be some extraction, maybe some dilution. It will then be injected onto the column, at which point there's a chromatogram. So some people have actually shared the chromatogram with us, which is really useful because you can really dig into the science behind it, because the HPLC doesn't just give you a number. In some ways it's a bit like FoodSense Generation 4. There's actually a raw signal behind that number, and the raw signal, you could call it the chromatogram. So in this case we've never seen the chromatogram, which is fine, we do not need to see it, but just to say I have actually looked at chromatograms as well. Now that chromatogram is then put against a calibration curve, and the calibration curve then turns essentially area under curve of that peak into concentration, and from there you can probably calculate Scoville heat unit. So there's quite a lot of steps actually. So when people just sort of take a certificate of analysis from HPLC at kind of face value. They don't understand there's so many steps involved. There's actually room for error in the preparation, analysis, and even maybe calculation of that Scoville heat unit. And if this was perfect, if this HPLC workflow was perfect and it was low cost, rapid, easy to do, there wouldn't be a market for FoodSense Generation 4. As there is a market for FoodSense Generation 4. So HPLC can be expensive, non-transparent, and essentially can take too long. With that said, the one thing I did notice as well, I got the certificate of analysis online a while back. I just found it when Googling. What you'll find with these certificates of analysis is they'll tell you the HPLC method here. So they're using the AOC 1995.03 method, but there's never any error involved with this. As I say, with any kind of measurement, if you take 5 measurements on something, you will find something like distribution in results. You can look at that distribution results by looking at the relative standard deviation. But with HPLC, there's never any indication of relative standard deviation. Why? Because nobody tried to do a repeat of the measurement. So in fact, we are sometimes able to demonstrate a repeatability of measurement, whereas HPLC is never challenged on it because too expensive, takes too long, and it's too complex to actually get the result in the first place. And you never see the calibration curve. So for example, with an HPLC, it does not give you Scoville heat unit. You actually have area under curve, which then is used with a calibration line, but you do not know when that calibration line was done. An HPLC system, it has to be routinely calibrated. So for example, you would test it against known capsaicin concentrations. You have to do it routinely because the machine has got pumps, sensors on it, lines, when I mean lines, bringing in solvent. There's a lot of pieces, and all of them will have some sort of wiggle with them. So in fact, the machine doesn't stay in calibration for months on end. You actually have to quite regularly calibrate it. So you never really, when people get these certificates of analysis, they're never indicated as to when that machine was last actually calibrated. I'm just kind of sort of pointing out that we're not looking at a perfect system when we're looking at HPLC. With that said, at ZP, we're promoting the developers and manufacturers of the FoodSense Generation 4. I am going to talk about results of the FoodSense Generation 4, but before I do that, for people who are not familiar with the FoodSense Generation 4, this is a FoodSense Generation 4. I'll put a chili sensor into it now, which I just do now. Clip that in like that. I'm just going to bring my phone in. You can see a better demonstration of this. Every month we're doing monthly webinars where we actually will do quite a few samples. With that said, I think I've got that set up. I haven't at all introduced this product today, but this is in Bluetooth connection with my phone. I'm just going to put a sample on here quick. Put that sample on here. The cost, speed of test, and actually the transparency of test is really high with this particular instrument. What I mean, cost, so these sensors, for example, I think cost about €3.50 each. The buffer costs about €500. No, €250 for a large bottle. We hardly use any of the material. And you get the result immediately as well, which is an important, let's say, aspect of this. And there's also a good level of transparency on this. When I mean a good level of transparency, you get the result, you know what you did. So I will change cameras now so that you can actually see effectively that result. So let me just go to here. So the result is 3,430 Scoville heat units, which is not bad actually. I mean, people have complained to me that I was actually testing a sample of Tabasco sauce. It's very easy to actually prepare that sample, so it's a nice easy one for us to do. What I am talking about today, the results that I will talk about, are definitely not on Tabasco sauce. I'm not entirely sure what they may be. They may be actual powders. But that said, what I want to do is just change my camera for a second here and just go to the results. So we got a good transparency here. If you come to one of our monthly webinars, I will talk about this more vigorously. Beautiful, what I call voltammogram here. I can really see the fingerprint for capsaicin. and I can see my results up on the screen as well. With that said, I'm going to what am I going to do? I'm going to go back now and go through my actual original presentation. So let me just do that. So that was a quick demonstration of the hardware, just to put some context into this. So we got these results from an HPLC third-party test. We also did our own measurements at ZP. So we got 3,000 Scoville heat units, 5,000 Scoville heat units, 20,000 Scoville heat units, 40,000 Scoville heat units. I'm just sort of rounding. I'm not even rounding correctly, but we got a range of results. But the person wanted to know what were our individual results behind those. So let me just dive into that a little bit. So we did 5 tests on sample A. We did what we call a 1 in 100 dilution. We got 18,300, 23,500, 19,800, 16,500, 19,200, with an average of 19,460 Scoville heat units, a standard deviation of 2,579, and a relative standard deviation of 13%. Sometimes people say, well, that range is not good because you've got 16,500 year and 23,500 year. This is because of the way the Scoville heat units work. Because essentially what you're doing is you're taking this ppm value, parts per million, and you're actually times it by 16. So any kind of, let's say, error in that first measurement, you're then timesing it by 16. So it can really look like, it can really exaggerate your perception of the repeatability or the precision of this instrument. If you were to actually look at the same numbers, but in ppm, parts per million, then we've got 1,144, 1,469, 1,238, 1,031, 1,200. So an average of 1,216, a standard deviation of 161, and therefore a relative standard deviation of 13%. It's just perception-wise looks better when you talk about ppm. But when you times these ppm values sometimes by 16, then you make everything kind of, you really exaggerate the apparent differences. The reason, I'm going to do a different video on this, but in fact, the entire scale for Scoville heat units is essentially 0 to, I would say, 3 million Scoville heat units. Strictly speaking, it's from 0 to 16 million Scoville heat units. You've got this massive range, in fact. So sometimes the differences that we're talking about are tiny differences on the great scale of actually what Scoville heat unit is. With that said, I think the practical way of looking at the Scoville heat unit range is actually more like 0 to 3 million Scoville heat units, because the hottest chili out there is Pepper X, which apparently is about 2.6 million Scoville heat units. Anyway, that all said, I'm just saying that when you sometimes look at these values in Scoville heat units, you could say, oh, well, that range is really bad, 16,500 versus 23,500. That's the kind of range on those 5 values. But actually, when you really look at it back at the ppm scale, it's nothing's really changed. It's just the perception that when you go from ppm to Scoville heat units. And the reason that this is all a bit, I'm not going to say messy, is because Wilbur Scoville, I think, invented this Scoville scale in, I think, 1912. And it was a pure organoleptic test. He was tasting, and he kind of came up with this method that we keep on diluting the sample so you can no longer taste it. So when the AOAC came up with an HPLC test, it was not an organoleptic test. They were actually going to give a result either in micromolar or ppm, parts per million. They were giving the result in a sort of chemistry units, whereas Wilbur Scoville is an organoleptic unit. And so the AOC kind of had to invent this way of mapping their analytical results onto the organoleptic range. So I think initially they were using a multiplier of 15, and then I think they changed the multiplier to 16. But I can see that there must have been a lot of debate at those times, because, who is to say, because that translation of either 16 or 15 is almost like saying that, everyone universally would perceive that hotness as being exactly 16x or 15x, and it's just not the way it works. But that said, they had a historical problem when they were coming up with this new method at the AOAC for HPLC, which was there was an incumbent method, which was this Wilbur-Scoville scale, which started in 1912, and it was really just based on tasting and dilution. So I could see that the problem they had. Anyway, that said, let me go back to my original point. My original point is these are the individual tests. We end up with this sample A, I call it here, which is actually, previously I called it sample 3, with an average of 19,460 and a relative standard deviation of 13%, and these are the individual results behind that. I'll go quicker on sample B. 4,720, 5,220, 6,090, 6,020, 5,610, an average of 5,532, a standard deviation of 573, and a relative standard deviation of 10%. And whoops-a-daisy. Again, you can look at that also in the ppm scale as well. Nothing really changes. It's just sometimes when you look at the ppm scale, you kind of, your lowest one in here is 351 and your highest one here is 381. So if I told you that was a range, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's okay. Whereas, you know, somebody would look at that and say, oh, the difference there is 400, that's massive. Yeah, it's because of this flipping multiplier. To go from a chemical unit to a organoleptic unit, there's this ridiculous multiplier. So it multiplies and blows everything up. But it's only the human brain that actually sort of, you know, the way the human brain, I think, looks at this. When you've multiplied everything up by 16, it makes you think that you've got this massive range. Whereas if you left it in the ppm scale, you actually would not consider that a particularly big range. Sample C, we've got results of 46,600 Scoville heat units, 35,000, 37,300, 45,800, and an average of 41,175, standard deviation of 5,887, and a relative standard deviation of 14%. So it's good repeatability. Again, I've also put in the ppm scale. When you look at it in the ppm scale, so you look at those numbers and you think, oh yeah, everything looks really, you know, good. When of course, and I could see actually another intellect. The reason you say that everything looks good, because when you look at that, everything starts with 2 there. 2, 2, 2, 2. When you look at it in this scale, 4, 3, 3, 4. So that would make you think that had a bigger range. It's understanding the psychology of how the human brain looks at numbers, I think, is important. But in the ppm scale, it's the same results. It's just you times ppm by 16 to get back into Scoville heat units. As I say, I think that 16 is a little bit arbitrary. I didn't invent it. The AOAC invented it. Sample D, 2,810, 3,140, 3,570, 3,970, 3,080. Again, so you've got that 2 in there. So that 2 would make you think, oh, there's a bit of a range on that. But actually, if you'd left it in the ppm scale, we've got 176, 196, 222, and 248. It doesn't look, you know, in fact, the entire range is 176 to 248. But again, you've only got a relative standard deviation of 14%. Notice that HPLC is never challenged in this way. Why? Because it's too expensive, too costly, and actually, you know, there's no transparency to it. So you never get repeated tests. In fact, in the USA, to do something like 5 HPLCs, the cheapest it will cost you, I think people will do it for $60, but I think that's probably very cheap, and it takes about a month. That would cost you about $300. I think in the faster, maybe, I don't want to say more professional, it may cost you $100, so it's more like $600. Now, as you can see, we're quite good at doing technical support of clients. This is a technical support of a client session, but if you have any questions as EP, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, thanks very much.